Greetings, travelers.
Greetings, travelers, for our last episode of Monster Man.
Wow, I'm
That
gonna
just
miss
happened.
those.
I hope everybody is with me on that just happening.
I'm gonna miss Monster May. Oh my gosh.
Are you?
Yeah, this has become one of my favorite months of the year now because we did this theme.
I
I
love Monster Man because I love monsters.
We're halfway to Halloween, so we had to do monsters, right? Yeah, it was just
Exactly.
and with this episode, I think what are we 139 episodes somewhere in there? Oh my gosh, I've lost count. It's crazy.
Yes, I know counting is hard for you. So,
Yeah, I don't, the count isn't here to count for me. And
yes, well, I can tell you it's 139 episodes.
geez,
So,
that's crazy. And we've got this now shared universe with all these other podcasts we've been on and they've been on with us. And we were recently on Hometown Haunts, had their 100th episode, and we told our ghost story about the house ghost here on it for their 100th
yes.
episode. And it was a lot. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't checked them out, they're a great little podcast as well. And then we did Wild and Weird Radio as well earlier this month. Please check that out if you didn't. And we were happy to have them on here. I'm just so excited. This has been an amazing month. I'm thrilled.
Yes, I agree. It's very, yes. I'm
Yes.
so excited. Okay, but you, quote unquote, and I'm using quotes,
Yeah.
save the best for last.
That's what I thought. I thought this was one. I'm sad Beth could not be part of this because she was one of the big reasons I wanted to do this episode, but she wound up having to work suddenly, so she couldn't make the episode. But we were going to talk about the first monster cinematic universe, and that is the Universal Monsters. And
Yes.
as we talked to so many people this month, what Owl going back, we talked to Michael Roddy, we talked to all these other people, and they all mentioned that they were monster kids, right? That they all
Yes.
grew up with the monsters. And we grew up with Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, which was a magazine. This was before VHS came about, right? So we had this magazine that you would flip through that had pictures of old horror movies, and they were full page pictures of Lon Chaney and Bela Lugosi and Boris Karloff, and now household names. But back then in the 70s, even then, they were kind of forgotten because the video era had not come about yet. And you would see them maybe on a rerun of an old horror host, like we did that episode last Halloween talking about the horror hosts. And they would show some of these old movies. And as kids, though, you're just drawn to that, right? It was, oh my gosh. And it just sparked the imagination. And then finally, you would get lucky, and maybe one of those horror hosts would show one of those movies, and you'd be like, yes, this is incredible. And it's better than I anticipated because Forey Ackerman had written about it so well, or one of the other guys who wrote for Famous Monsters. But then you would see it and you'd be like, oh, wow, this is so crazy, especially black
Well,
and white.
we also have to, I mean, you didn't get us into the Wayback Machine, but we need to kind of go a little bit into the Wayback Machine because when these monsters first came out, weren't they only on film? Like the only way you could see them was going to the movie theater.
Right.
And there wasn't such a thing as horror movies. The way, like, we have horror movies all over the place. Like, you can't
Well,
turn around without a horror movie throwing itself in your face, right?
well, there were some silent films that had gone into horror a little bit before Universal even did. One of the first Edison movies was a adaptation of Frankenstein, which we talk about as the first great science fiction novel, which with horror elements all the way
Yeah.
back 300 plus years. Thank you, Mary Shelley, for inventing this genre. And
But that
then
was a whole thing to present
yeah,
the audience with these terrifying
yeah,
monster images. And, we look at them now, and in comparison to, say, for instance, even Candyman, these guys, they look tame. They look
yeah,
tame, but back then, not tame.
not tame at all. And you go back to 1912. So we'll go back in the Wayback Machine to 1912. And today's oldest surviving movie studio is Universal Studios. And it was founded by a man named Carl Laemmle. And it was not a big player in Hollywood at the time, right? It was, in fact, it was considered one of the little three. It, Columbia, and United Artists were the little studios, right?
Wow.
Now, Universal in the 1920s starts realizing there's an audience for the spooky and for the creepy. And so they are also, realizing if there's money, we should go into this. Now, there was Carl Laemmle had a son, Carl Laemmle Jr., who was big into the classic horror novels, right? That was his thing. And so he was trying desperately to get his dad to bankroll a bigger production for these horror movies. And he finds his actor, right, that makes it happen. And we got to go with basically what is considered by many the first Universal horror film. And that is the man, Lon Chaney Sr. He was around before makeup departments, right?
Okay.
Studios didn't have makeup departments, and they were starting to, but they were cranking out hundreds of movies a day for these silent films, right? And they would post call lists of who all they needed for scenes. And Lon Chaney decided he was going to be an actor. He'd been a vaudeville actor for years and had always done makeup, clown makeup, and other things like that. And then he started noticing they were asking for these very obscure things, like looking for, I forget the term, but it was one of the ones that made him was that he saw that he could play a West Indian pirate with a missing eye. And because they were casting these extras for $30 a part. And that's, was a lot of money back then, but they were the special extras. Like the regular extras were getting $10 a part. So he would make himself up and then run over and do the part and get the extra $20. And this is helping him support his son and all this stuff. So he started doing all this, and he didn't tell anybody his secrets, right? That was the big thing. This was just him doing these crazy things. And he was under contract with Universal to do these parts. And he actually left in 1917 because one of the guys told him, "Oh, you're never going to be more than $100 a week guy because you don't have the face that we need for Hollywood." Right. So he left for a little while.
Wow.
But then he suddenly does a movie called The Miracle Man in 1919. And that's about a guy coming home from war who's able to his legs are all crossed, he's all beat up, but in the miracle scene, this man heals him and his leg uncrosses and he does all this. And he does this whole physical act. It's probably one of the most incredible pieces of film ever. But because of that, Carl Laemmle goes, "Oh my gosh, here's my guy. I've been wanting to make this movie forever, and now I've got a guy who can actually do the part." And he wines and dines him and says, "Look, this is the book, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I want you to be my Quasimodo because you made that guy in Miracle Man who looks terrible and is scary to everybody who looks at him, but you gave him heart, and that's the same thing we want to do with Quasimodo." And so Chaney worked from a description in Victor Hugo's novel, and he used that little leather box of tricks, right? And he makes the deformed face, built up cheeks, nose. He's got a protruding eye, and he's got these just terrible teeth, which nobody had ever done. And everybody always forgets to do the teeth. Even today, people forget to do the teeth. It's all about deforming the head and making the weird teeth. And then he even strapped a plaster hump onto his back, and he strapped it on himself so he couldn't move as freely as he wanted to. So the film releases.
Uh-huh.
And it is a huge hit. Makes some $3.5 million in the day,
Wow.
which
is huge back then.
For 1923.
That would have been
Money.
considered an epic
That's
blockbuster.
a blockbuster. And so they immediately go, "Okay, you are now a star. let's do the next one. And so, of course, Carl Laemmle Jr. goes, all right, well, the next one we got to do is Gaston Leroux's Phantom of the Opera. And, we're going to just keep plowing on with Gothic horror. And again, Chaney worked from the source material. He reads the book, right? And he sees a living skull, the face like a living skull. And so again, secrets. We don't know exactly how he did it. We know he had some wadding and a skull cap to raise his forehead. We know he glued down his ears, and again, more false teeth.
Of course.
And I think he created probably the most terrifying image ever on film. It's the nose. It's the missing nose. Where he had used wires to angle it up. The big thing was no photos of the Phantom were used ahead of any of the film's release, right? That's the brilliance of the marketing of this movie. So the audience has got their first glimpse right then when she takes that mask off in the film and he turns and looks at the camera and it's got that. And bam, the audience screams. People are fainting in the cinema. Can you imagine that?
Yeah,
so
it
excited
kind of reminds me of when we were younger. They tried to do that with the film. Was it Faces of Death?
Was it real? Was it not?
Yeah. But they did that and they did all these warnings like you're gonna whatever. But I don't think they warned people when this movie came out
No,
that this is what they were getting into.
And then Chaney goes on to make a bunch more, prestige pictures, but he's getting sick. We didn't know at the time, but it was cancer. And he did get to make one talking film, and that was The Unholy Three, where he played a couple different parts. And he had done it as a silent film where he played three different parts, but because the talkie, they weren't sure how versatile his voice was, but it was amazing. And so Carl Laemmle's like, all right, I want to do the next big one. It's been a little while. We haven't done a big one, and we need another moneymaker. So I'm going to do Dracula, and I want Lon to do it. And they started working on it, but he passed away.
Oh,
Now, Chaney wrote, I got a quote here from Movie Magazine from 1925. And that's why I think Chaney is probably one of the greatest actors of all time. He says, I wanted to remind people that the lowest types of humanity may have within them the capacity for supreme self-sacrifice. The dwarfed, misshapen beggar of the streets may have the noblest of ideals. That's why he was incredible. And that's what he brought to every part that he did. And
wow.
We thought that might be the end because they lost their leading man. The horror of the 20s was ending. What do we do? And now we're moving into talkies. Horror films won't be big in the talking era. They were the secrets to them was the silence, right? No, we still get Dracula, but this time they had to cast somebody new. They didn't have pop culture to tap into, but they knew Dracula was a big hit in the books. And so the Sun said, let's make an even bigger production. So we'll make a bigger sets. We'll do all this stuff. But he's like, but instead of doing the novel, there's a stage play in Broadway that is doing really well with this. Let's just adapt that. That way it's a lot easier for us. Saves us a little bit of money. And the star of that is getting really, really, really great reviews. And that was a man named Bela Lugosi.
Oh my gosh, that's where that came from?
And that is where the rest is cinema history, right? So we get the debonair, exotic vampire, right? The pure sex appeal at the time. And Universal was very happy to just go, yes, bring us this. And Bela Lugosi comes to the count. He did have to lobby hard for his chance to be in the film, even though he had gotten those really great reviews. And he was also a little worried that he might be typecast. So they approached him because he hadn't really done makeup for the stage play much, right? They approached him and they had this guy that was doing makeup now that Lon had passed, this guy they'd made a makeup department, and this guy named Frank Pierce was going to come and do some makeup to give him fangs and do all this, and Bella's like refused it, and which is perfect, for Bela. He didn't need it, but I can only imagine what it would have been with him. And then they bring in director Todd Browning. So this is his first supernatural horror. So this was a big gamble for Universal,
Yeah.
and it becomes the most profitable film of 1931. Made $2.2 million. They were in the hole, and this made that and more. Right?
Wow.
Universal. It saved Universal Studios. This is the film that saved them. And although we now joke about Bella's, children of the night, what music they make, that is still quotable, right? To this day.
That and the fact is, he was terrifying to everyone. Like, that
Yep.
was scary back then.
No fangs ever in the movie.
I
You'd
wonder
think
why.
it was just he didn't need them. And most of the time, the stage Draculas never wore fangs,
Interesting.
because you can't see them from the audience anyway. And that actually winds up in 1979 when it's remade. Frank Langella, he becomes Dracula in the more modern era, and probably my favorite version of Dracula. Yeah, I love Bella's, but Frank Langella's 79 is great too. And again, no fangs.
Very interesting to
All
me.
right. So Bella becomes huge hit, right?
Yes.
And they're like, okay, Bella's the new Lon Chaney. He's going to be our new man of mystery. That's the beauty, because nobody knows this guy. So they're billing him as the next man of mystery, and they want him for this next project. And Bella goes, nah, I don't want to get typecast doing just monsters. I'm going to do other things. But of course, turning down this role winds up costing him so much, because we come next to they have to cast another unknown in this, and a lisping Englishman named William Henry Pratt, who had been in 80 movies before this. Jack Pierce went to him and said, hey, if you're willing to let me work on you for about 4 hours a day making makeup, you're going to be the scariest thing ever on camera, and people are going to love you. And now William Henry Pratt changed his name at this, before this, to Boris Karloff,
Which is much more scary than,
which is,
yeah.
yeah, Pierce, who is now he had done The Man Who Laughs, which we now look back on as the inspiration for the Joker. He'd done The Monkey Talks, which is another spooky monkey movie thing. But Lugosi, like I said, had already passed up on his Dracula work, but the monsters makeup with the body scars, the brain cavity, the sunken cheek, where Karloff actually just pulled out his dentures, which helped him make that. It was Pierce just made it up and made it so incredible. And he was actually looking up techniques of 19th century doctors.
Oh,
And
really?
yep. And then they also made up the classic character of Fritz, who would become Igor in the more modern movies, but that's basically, the kind of hunchback lab assistant. It was a tribute to Lon again. And the guy who played him was Dwight Fry, who had also played Rainfield in Dracula. So he was kind of the connecting tissue here, same actor playing that. And again, back to Chaney with pathos and empathy. Karloff
Yes.
is the misunderstood monster. And the scene where he interacts with the little girl by the lake shows all he really wants is a friend. But even that innocent play has tragic consequences
As
that,
it always does with monsters.
becomes huge. So Frankenstein again saves Universal, yet another horror film, and now Universal is a big player, right? They've become the blockbuster film company. So we got to do another one. 1932, the next year. What was big in the news that year?
What, war?
The
No?
discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb.
Okay, yeah. I would never have known that.
Okay.
So cool.
Howard
Cool, cool.
Carter discovered that. It was big in the 20s, but it was finally coming to America. Some of the items were coming to America for tour. And so Universal decided to create something new and original. Instead of using a classic novel, And again, Jack Pierce and Boris Karloff team up. And now Karloff spends most of his time in this movie not in the crazy amount of wrapped up makeup, but that was the image. They actually used that image for marketing this time because they're like, we don't have to keep it a secret anymore. People want to see the spooky. Let's show them how spooky we can make him. So they really mummified and wrapped him up and did all this craziness to Boris Karloff. And apparently it took about 8 hours to get him fully done. And they based it on Ramses the Third. The rest of the film, though, Karloff, who is in this build as Karloff the Uncanny. I always thought that was a
Oh,
great name, right? He wore lighter makeup for the rest of his role as Imhotep, and he's searching for his princess Anaxanamun, who's been reincarnated, and he wants to bring her back to his original life. Now, this is the only time Karloff plays Imhotep on the screen. Now, though, The Mummy becomes a hit and it gets some sequels, but Karloff only did it at one point. Now, Lugosi, Karloff, they start doing a couple other movies. They do The Black Cat and The Raven, which were just basic horror films.
yeah.
And again, Lugosi and Karloff, they're the kings of horror. Let's just keep them going in these movies. And they have some fun with that. But 1933, they decide, let's go back to classics. Right?
Okay.
We got one more guy we want to bring in from the classic movies. And this is based on one of my favorite authors, H.G. Wells's novel. And they crank up the crazy to make probably the most horrific and probably in my mind, the most dangerous and destructive of all the villains. And that is chemist Jack Griffin discovers the secret of invisibility. And he's pushed over the edge of sanity by his power. He is definitely the most deadly of all the Universal monsters, deliberately harming and killing over 100 innocent bystanders in this movie.
Wow.
And he's still given, because it's Universal, we still got to give him some sympathy. And it's all because the serum has driven him mad. And, he's trying to prove himself to his fiancée. And, and again, in this, we have Claude Rains, a British actor, making his American debut as the voice of Griffin. And the reason he got it was because his voiceover was heard in a screen test for another movie, and it was basically cast for his voice. And the special effects were created by John Fulton, and it's pretty groundbreaking, but again, simple. So when he was partially clothed, he had invisible body parts covered in black velvet and shot against a black velvet background. And this, combined with the shot on a regular set, basically makes that illusion of invisibility. And he actually makes us all the way through where Griffin unwraps himself in front of the mirror using 4 different shots that had to be overlaid amongst each other. And what's sad is, even though it becomes a huge hit, H.G. Wells was not a fan of the film. And sadly, that kind of, because he didn't like him being turned into a lunatic, right?
Oh, weird.
And
Because
Rains
he was a lunatic.
in the book, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But he actually did not really like Claude Rains's laugh, which I think is probably one of the greatest bits in. Oh man, it's gold.
And thus, H.G. Wells started why sometimes authors are not invited to be part of the making of the
Yeah.
movie based on their book. Because I love authors, we're authors. I would love to micromanage the fuck out of the making of any of my stories, but guess what?
Yeah.
Stephen King said it best. I don't know, they already paid me for it. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. I got the check. It's all good. They can do whatever they want to it. That was when I sold my script to the Mexican production company. I still don't know if it ever got made, but I cashed that check and I was happy as could be. So
Yeah, I
but
mean, as much as you'd like it to be and who they want to cast, like the director has an image, and that laugh is like iconic.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Just and then
So
they called me mad. I can't do that. It's
you can't
but
bitch about that. We
now
don't
we're
allow
gonna get
that.
into the sequels start coming out. And sometimes the
Okay.
sequels, as we know, can be better than the original.
Yes, that is true.
But there's still a couple more original monsters that are gonna sneak in here. And then the universe where they start interacting begins. And we're gonna get into that after the break, gang. Thanks so much for indulging and
Oh, of
enjoying
course,
Monster.
it's one of the Muncy. Look at we just went down a Muncy bunny trail and did not have to shut you up. You should be thrilled about that before
I'm
the break.
thrilled. I'm so happy with this, and we're getting into the fun stuff. And don't worry, we will talk about the modern return of Emotep and An Ox on a Moon in a little while because I know that's what you all really want to listen to.
Destiny Beard, the lyrical soprano who will haunt your dreams. With her alluring melodies and intricate harmonies, this dark siren of wistful song shall capture your soul and lead you into the night. Check out Destiny's new single, The Haunting Is Over, with international musicians Sam Haines and Gary Bennett, as well as her other musical works at destinybeard.com.
Greetings, travelers. Now available on Audible and other audiobook platforms, Eerie, Appalachia. Join us, won't you, as we discuss creatures like the Popelick Monster, the White Fangs, the Snallygaster, the Wampus Cat, the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp, Bunny Man Bridge, and the Ohio Grassman. All these creatures and more await you if you dare listen to Eerie, Appalachia, presented by Mark Muncy, History Press, and Four Horsemen Publishing.
We are back.
We're back, and like many coming back, the sequel to one of these movies we've discussed comes out because they decide to do it, and they get director James Whale. He had pitched numerous ideas, and they had all been rejected by Universal because there had been sequel ideas before to various movies. But this one, they finally said, you know what? We're going to mash a few of these together and put them together. And this one was basically, again, back to Shelley's original novel. So we get the sequel to Frankenstein, and some consider it superior to the movie Frankenstein, and that is The Bride of Frankenstein, where the creature demands a mate.
Ooh.
In the novel, she's never brought to life, right? But it's the idea of that sparks the film. Whale was certain that he couldn't ever top the first film, but he kept very strict standards. Now, Whale was just very flamboyant man and probably one of the less closeted people of his day. And so he starts putting that into the movie. And he gets Eliza Lancaster, who plays Mary Shelley in the film's prologue, to be the bride, the titular bride. And then he kind of wanted to show how horror springs from the imagination. And again, Jack Pierce is brought back, and Elsa Lancaster did not care much for the makeup, right? But he
Yeah.
gives her that stunning look and basically combines horror and glamour and the little stitched chin with the deep lipstick. Oh my gosh. And the Nefertiti lightning bolt. That hair is
Well, not
incredible.
only that, it brought a female in as something other than, I hate to say it, a love interest or a victim. Like it was a little bit of a different game because of that, right?
And in this one, they give the monster the ability to speak. And Karloff actually didn't want that because he thought it was just so cool being inarticulate and all that, just being able to grunt and do all that. But one of my favorite characters is introduced in this, and that is Dr. Pretorius, who is the biggest flaming character in movie history. If you have not watched The Bride of Frankenstein, watch it just for Dr. Pretorius, who is the one who convinces Frankenstein to make the bride. It's just so much solemn expression of loneliness. And there's a reason that, we get the social religious subtext and some LGBTQ plus stuff in here. So definitely way ahead of its time, 1935. And again, Karloff, as much as I love him talking in this was the right choice. And history has proven his initial concern about that wrong, because now we get the voice of Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster, friend, and all that. It's amazing.
And he
So,
didn't talk that much. It wasn't like he did a dissertation on world peace, right?
no, exactly. He just, it's enough. It's enough. So we go a few years on coasting, and we go to 1941. In 1935, they had actually made, same year of Bride of Frankenstein, they made a movie called Werewolf of London, which is
we all know Beau would be all about that.
Yeah, it's a pretty solid movie. 1940, and it's certainly deserving of praise, but it's 1941. They take the blueprint from that and make a much better film. We get even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane's blooms and the autumn moon is bright. The key in this is we brought a son of a famous actor, and that would be Lon Chaney Jr., playing our lead role of Larry Talbot. First, he was billed as Creighton Chaney, but he soon changed it to Lon Chaney Jr. because people are like, who the hell's Creighton Chaney? And the junior, they would actually even drop the junior in the publicity materials because many people didn't know Lon had died. So they just assumed it was him. And so he becomes the Wolfman. And Jack Pierce comes back, and he didn't like using, Jack didn't want to use some of the new stuff like foam latex. So he kept using those same painstaking materials. And so he was more expensive, but Carl Laemmle was, let's do it. Let's go crazy. Let's make this as good as it can be. And so Lon Chaney has a reaction to some of the makeup they're using. They actually have there's this important bit of film history, and Chaney had an allergic reaction to the Wolfman makeup, which was yak hair that was being glued on. And there's actually an unfortunate burning incident with a pair of tongs. So he and Jack Pierce don't like each other very much after a short bit. And so that kind of developed, Pierce also kind of having this being rough to work with kind of thing, but he knew how big he was in making these monsters. So Pierce never really received on-screen credit for any of his makeups. And in fact, got fired from Universal in 1946.
Wow.
1968, when he died, people had forgotten him. And it's sad, but it took us and Famous Monsters of Filmland and all that to bring it back and to learn who this amazing man was. And now he's synonymous with horror makeup, but that's what it took. But anyway, Lon Chaney Jr. does make this amazing character. And then Bela Lugosi as a cameo as a gypsy named Bella, who was the progenitor werewolf in this, who has the curse. It's amazing. And then Claude Rains, our Invisible Man, plays the Lord, Chaney's dad in this. And it's incredible. And I love it.
It's so funny. When you said Claude Rains was the Invisible Man, literally Rocky Horror Picture Show just played in my head. The opening credits,
it's all tributes to these guys. They are incredible. Now cut to the last of the new monsters, right? Now there were other films. Before I cut to this guy.
Okay.
While 1931, while they were working with Bela Lugosi's Dracula, another company, to save money, Universal made a Spanish version of Dracula on the same sets at night. And if you haven't watched that, because it slipped past you, give yourself a shot and go watch the Spanish Dracula from 1931. In some
Okay.
scenes, I think it's better than Bella's. It's incredible. Now, we had some other fun ones. Like I said, we mentioned some of the other ones with Bela and Boris. They did Murders in the Rue Morgue. They did The Old Dark House. They did Black Cat. They did The Raven. They were trying Edgar Allan Poe. Mystery of Edwin Drood, that had Claude Rains in it in 35. They had Dracula's Daughter was a sequel. The Invisible Ray was a sequel that had Boris and Bela in it. They had The Night Key, The Phantom Creeps. So all these ones. And then we come up with another big, amazing sequel, and that is Son of Frankenstein. And that again has Boris, and this time Bela as the Igor character, and Basil Rathbone as Dr. Frankenstein's grandson. Does this sound familiar? It becomes
Yes.
Son of Frankenstein becomes Young Frankenstein when Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder get a hold of it much later. There's Tower of London, Black Friday. These are all considered Universal Monsters movies. Then we get the wonderful Invisible Man Returns. And this time Claude Rains doesn't do it, but we get this other guy who discovers Griffin's secret, and that is Vincent Price.
Oh,
And
Vincent
another man
Price.
cast for his voice. Then the sequel to that, later that year, they didn't wait a year, they make The Invisible Woman. And this one starts having some real comedy in it. And that's where we start seeing the transition, where some of the lighter elements start really, they were kind of hinted at, like I said, the flamboyance of Bride of Frankenstein and all that. But Invisible Woman, man, it's way over the top. She's a model who gets injected with it, and so she's not happy. We get The Mummy's Hand because we couldn't get Karloff back. So we have to do a sequel with just his hand. Yeah. Dracula's Daughter didn't get Bela back in 1936, so they just have this wax representation of him. And then Lon Chaney Jr. got to do one called Man-Made Monster, which was kind of a Frankenstein. It's kind of one of those forgotten ones, but it's not in it because it's not that great. But then he returns with the Wolfman, which
The
really
Wolfman.
goes crazy. So now they start, the Wolfman dies, spoiler, but he's killed by his father, Claude Rains, with a silver-tipped cane. But they decide, we want to bring him back. We also want to bring back Frankenstein. We want to bring back all these others. So we get a couple more in the early 1940s, Black Cat remake with Basil Rathbone and Bela Lugosi. We get Mad Doctor of Market Street. We get Horror Island. But then we get the movie that starts the shared universe. Because at this point, they had started doing the shows where they showed them together, Dracula and Frankenstein, back to back. Do you dare watch both these together? We talked about those back when we were talking about the horror hosts, right?
Yeah.
That's what started it all. So they decide, let's make a movie with both of them. And so they come up with Ghost of Frankenstein. And this one, instead of bringing back Dracula, they do have Bela Lugosi playing Igor again. But Lon Chaney gets woken up as the Wolfman from his grave by a couple grave robbers, and he gets struck by lightning. This is when Hollywood starts really going crazy with the stories. But he decides now he realizes he can't die. He has to die. So he goes and seeks out Dr. Frankenstein to kill him so he can have that permanent death. And that's when we start getting the crossovers.
Way before the MCU crossovers.
Right. Suddenly Werewolf and Frankenstein and the guy who played Dracula all in the same movie.
Place? What?
Yep. We get a couple more fun ones. We get Night Monster of Bela Lugosi. We get Invisible Agent, another Invisible Man movie, this time with Peter Lorre, who is one of my favorite actors of all time. He'd been in Casablanca and all that. And he's, Reek, I am so sorry, Reek. But we love Peter Lorre. We get The Mummy's Tomb, but this time with Lon Chaney Jr. playing the mummy. And then they decide, that's it, let's stop the pretenses. We do Frankenstein meets Wolfman, 1943. We're going to do this. And then they do their first color movie, where they bring back Phantom of the Opera. But this time it's classic Claude Rains in the title. And it is their only color Universal Classic horror movie. But we can't stop there. We bring back Son of Dracula with Lon Chaney Jr. again in the title role this time. And then we go through a bunch until we get to House of Frankenstein in 1944. And that is the Avengers of the Universal horrors. It has Dracula, Frankenstein, Wolfman, everybody in this. Lionel Atwill as Dracula, Boris Karloff back as Dr. Frankenstein, Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, John Carradine, and all the it's incredible. We do The Invisible Man's Revenge. We do The Mummy's Ghost, The Mummy's Curse, the sequel to House of Frankenstein, because we did an Infinity War, basically. Now we have the Endgame, which is House of Dracula, which in 1945. And again, brings back everybody. And at this point, though, the monsters aren't doing as well, right? The horror genre has been milked as much as it can.
Well, I was going to say they're not doing stuff that's new. So a lot of the initial thing was the shock of these creatures and stuff like that.
Yep.
But then when you're like, and this is true, I hate to say it, with most sequels, there are very few sequels that we go, oh my God. But the ones that do well usually change it up a little bit with the monster, right? Like Aliens, just because I want to bring that up yet again.
So then they decide to try a new guy. And this guy's named Rondo Hatton. In fact, we have the awards, the Rondo Hatton Awards named after him. He's a very stark looking guy. He has a very pronounced jaw. And he'd been in a few movies like The Killer and stuff like that. So he does one called The Jungle Captive right before they did House of Dracula. And they really liked him. So they brought him back for a movie called The Brute Man and House of Horrors. And then they did The She-Wolf of London with June Lockhart, of all people, the mom from Lost in Space. But what do? We've got to revitalize these things. They team up with their biggest actors at the time, which is a comedy duo, Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. And so they come up with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Wow.
And this is quite possibly one of the greatest movies of all time, because it brings back, and it didn't have Karloff in it, but it brings back Bela Lugosi for the first time since the original as Dracula.
Wow.
They had Glenn Strange as the actor who plays Frankenstein, and Lon Chaney Jr. again as Larry Talbot, and he plays it straight. Man, he's terrified of all this, and Bud and Lou are just making the jokes, and it's amazing. And there's a cameo at the end from Vincent Price as the Invisible Man, if you can count that as a cameo.
Anytime Vincent Price is on screen, I count it.
Well, he's not on screen; it's a voice actor because he's Invisible Man. It's a joke.
He is there in my heart.
The reason, and Boris was so mad that he couldn't film that because he was filming another thing. He comes and they do a special one next year called Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer, Boris Karloff. Then they did Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. Again, diminishing returns. Abbott and Costello Meet Jekyll and Hyde. But then things take a turn, right? They do their first Alien movie. 1953, It Came from Outer Space. It's a fun science fiction movie. I consider it one of the classics. But we go into the last true Universal monster original, and that's in 1954 with our good old boy Riku Browning, who just passed away sadly a few years ago, and that is The Creature from the Black Lagoon.
I know that's one of your favorites.
It's so good. Again, they couldn't leave a good creature down, so they did 2 sequels to that, both with very diminishing returns. Revenge of the Creature. The cool thing about Revenge of the Creature has this early cameo from a guy named Clint Eastwood in it, and he's actually playing like a comedy role, which is fun to watch. And then The Creature Walks Among Us was the sequel, the third sequel to that. But if you go back and watch that original Creature from the Black Lagoon, it is incredible.
It is,
Um,
but again, I think part of this goes back to what we were talking about, that when you initially see it, you have this thing dragging you into the water, like all of that. And I think a lot of movie studios kind of figured this out, is you have to up the antics of it. Look at Jason 497, whatever Friday the 13th movie they're on right now. I'm not a huge fan of most of the sequels to these kind of things, because I think, again, that initial shock value is gone. But if you don't up it correctly, then it's just the same creature in a different setting, and people go, cool, you know?
and if you try to put this together, like with a chronology of the movies, like if you're actually in universe, this is why I wanted Beth on here to talk about, because she was trying to figure this out, like when these things all take place. And it's kind of like, because Lionel Atwill plays this town constable in House of Frankenstein, but then he's the mayor in Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. But in an earlier thing, he played the father of Elsa Frankenstein as Dr. Ludwig Frankenstein in a movie in The Ghost of Frankenstein. But she's his love interest in the Wolfman 1941 movie. So you can't, they're using the same actors, they're doing different parts. You can't try to piece it together. Even the geography is a little weird, because there's this Swiss village called Visseria in Ghost of Frankenstein and Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. But then in House of Frankenstein, it's called Village Frankenstein. So turn your brains off and just enjoy this for what it is. Now, these movies generally were re-released annually, right, in theaters. That's why they stayed with us as long as they did. Because remember, you couldn't show these on TV because they're too scary. The people at home wouldn't be able to handle this. And you couldn't show them, there was no VHS or Blu-ray and all that. So by the time the 1950s, 1960s, they're gone. People have forgotten them, right? They start disappearing. And Dracula and Frankenstein were jokes at Abbott and Costello. So they disappear for a while until the advent of VHS and also the horror hosts bringing
I was
them
going
back.
to say the horror host did a real,
And our boy Forey Ackerman and Famous Monsters of Filmland. Now we're going to have to do a full episode sometime around Halloween, but he was the one who never let him die. And he gave us Jack Pierce's information. He gave us the details on all this stuff, because he was the unofficial biographer for all of this. It's amazing. So now we cut to, there were some attempts to bring it back. Hammer Horror does the British version in the 60s, and that's a whole nother episode. Oh my gosh, we'll do the Hammer Horrors. But they never quite steal the crown. They come close. I mean, Christopher Lee is Dracula, and I think some of his performances do top some of the other guys. Okay. But they never quite steal that iconic stuff that Universal had. 1979, Frank Langella's Dracula, like I said, I think, and then Laurence Olivier is Von Helsing. Oh my gosh, that's an incredible movie. But we go to 1999, and I think that's when it finally, they decide to figure it out, right? And try to bring it back. And that's when they bring back our wonderful boy, the Mummy. They bring in Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. Oh my gosh. That's the chemistry, the charisma.
The humor.
The humor, right? They
made
embrace the humor of the later stuff.
Terrifying creature, but wrapped it in characters that were flawed and that you loved. And it's Brendan Fraser, and that's all I should have to say. That it's Brendan Fraser.
Yep. And again, 2 sequels, again, diminishing returns, but they do what they can with them. So in the 2000s, that kind of brought them back in the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
We have, so the monsters are back. Let's try again. So I think it ended with Dragon Emperor. Was that the third one? And the one where they brought it to China. They also got rid of Wise, which definitely, Maria Bello, I think, is who played the same character. She was okay, but they didn't have that chemistry.
No.
That Brendan Fraser had, right? Beau is about to throw up, I think. She's so upset about that. So 2004, they decide, let's do this properly. Let's do House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein. We're going to create another cinematic universe. And this time we've got Wolverine himself, Hugh Jackman is the biggest name in Hollywood now. What ties all these guys together? Well, there's one character, but he was in the Universal series, but only in Dracula. But they decided to go more with the Hammer horror. They brought back Von Helsing. It was Peter Cushing playing him in the Hammer films. So they decided to do Von Helsing as an action movie. And I'll let the 24% on Rotten Tomatoes, tell you how good that movie is. I know some people love it. It's campy. It's fun. My daughter, Beth, loves it, thinks it's an amazing movie. I just laughed through the whole thing. I think my girlfriend at the time laughed because I did a 2-hour rant of my problems with the movie after the movie was over, and she thought that was very entertaining. My only problem with that was at one point there's a carriage filled with explosives and it explodes. Of course, it's going to explode. But there's a second carriage and it falls off a cliff and it explodes. And I was like, yeah, the gas tanks on those old horse-drawn carriages, man, they're just notorious for going up. So that's
Well, and part of my problem with the way they did that is they didn't try to put some of the campy humor, because you're talking about creatures.
Yep.
Like there's a lot of retellings of like Frankenstein, like
yeah.
what's his name? Daniel Radcliffe did one,
Yeah.
which I thought actually was really good. But
the Ken Branagh, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, so good. And we'd also done Bram Stoker's Dracula, which had nothing to do with Bram Stoker's novel, except for maybe the first 10 minutes. Not that I'm bitter. I wanted that movie to succeed in the late 80s. But I know some people love it. Some people say it's their favorite version of Dracula. And I'm just like, what? You've never read the book. But then 2010, Benicio del Toro comes in and does Wolfman, which I know some people pan, but I thought it had a lot of great elements from the original movie. It actually has some good scares, right?
yes,
That's what makes it for me. It actually was scary. Then because of that, we wait a few more years and they tried Dracula Untold, which the less said about the better. They wait a couple more years because that failed, and they did The Mummy again, but this time with Tom Cruise. Oh, yep. And they even announced the Dark Universe. We're bringing them all back, and it's going to be amazing. And then this movie does so poorly that they just, nope, just pretend that never happened. And then finally, we get a return. 2020, we finally got a decent, and again, I think it was a little overrated, but it's still good, was The Invisible Man comes back in 2020. And it was a low budget, tried a different take. Blumhouse always does solid, if nothing else. And so I think they brought it back, and it was pretty solid. And we'll see where it goes from there. We've got others in the works, and Universal Studios is finally embracing their dark side, and they're making a new land in their new epic universe called Universal Dark Universe, which is going to be Dracula's castle, or Frankenstein's castle is the centerpiece. They've got some rides going to be themed about that. It's still all rumors and speculation, but I'm excited. And that's mostly because they've done so well with Universal Halloween Horror Nights that they decided we need a land for that 24/7.
Well, and that's, you do so popular this short time of year, and you go, look how many horror fans are out there. I think people underestimate how many horror fans there are. They all go, oh, everybody loves Harry Potter. Don't get me wrong, J.K. Rowling aside, I enjoy Harry Potter very much. It's one of my things. But you look and you go, well, what else do people absolutely love? They love being scared. And if they do this right, I think it will be thoroughly amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Some of the pre-production art looks great. I'm not 100% happy that they're not using their classic characters, the Frank Pierce makeup and all that. They're doing these modern takes on it, which could be good, could be bad, but some of the pre-art is not really winning me over. But the sets and the land, I'm all about. So there we go.
And I guess we're putting sort of a travel in place on that,
Yep.
right?
Well, we've got a few places to travel. One is go to Universal Studios Hollywood and take the back lot tour, they've still got some of those original sets built, the old original center village that was that Swiss village in so many movies, or the Romanian village or whatever. They use that same set over and over again. And they've got the original square built for the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the opera set from Phantom of the Opera. Those are all there, and you can still visit them. They're still used in modern movies, but they are great. And they've got the amazing statue tribute to Boris Karloff and the Frank Pierce makeup. So they have embraced Frank Pierce finally and realized they've done him wrong and have that. So definitely wonderful places to visit. I highly recommend, if you want to know more about this stuff, Mark Gatiss did an amazing documentary, and a lot of my research comes from that, called A History of Horror. And it is incredible. It's from the BBC, and he goes up to, basically starts with the Universals and goes all the way up to the Hammer horror stuff. So he stops with Halloween. So he goes all the way up to the slashers, but that's where he considers horror ends in his history, because he's like, it shifts to a different type of horror. He likes the classics. He did a sequel series called Horror Europa, which delves into the Giallo and all the other stuff. But definitely, we'll put the links to that in here. Pick up a copy. If you're a horror fan, you'll love it. Famous Monsters of Filmland is still available. They are actually printing new issues, which is very cool. They just brought it back. So excited about that. Even though Forey Ackerman's Ackermansion is no longer around, that would be the other place I would highly recommend finding. But a lot of his props, he had the collection of all the original props and all that. And that stuff went out to various studio collections. So we'll put the links to some of those museums. You can go visit that at as well.
This has been fun. Have you been having fun going on your deep dive here, Mark?
I had so much fun with this. I watched a couple of the originals. Had to watch Abbott and Costello again just because it had been a little while and I'd forgotten how much fun it is. Way too good, all of them. There are some that are a pain to watch. Looking at you, Invisible Woman. But man, you can't go wrong. Monster May. Come on.
Monster May.
You've got till Halloween to watch all of these. So,
oh, is that the order of things?
I just say have fun with them, right? There's amazing stuff in all of these. Some are just incredible. There's a complete list on Monster Complex. I'll send that link too. But, it's a shared universe before Marvel. It started with Bella and moved on. Come on. It's so cool. So.
It's true. It's true. And I think that there needs to be an appreciation for where all of our love of horror and things like that came from, because these were for some of the first adaptations of horror books into movies, and it laid the groundwork for what we all love today.
And again, Rondo Hatton, some of these names, people go, who? He was the creeper in that House of Horrors movie and the Brute Man, but most people don't even remember him. But he now has an award every year called the Hatton Awards, and the horror people fight to win that award every year because it's such a prestigious honor. This just goes. They moved to television in the 50s with Shock Theater, but they disappeared and then they come back, and then they disappear and then they come back. The classic monsters appeared as the model kits. Remember those? The Aurora models in the 60s. Yeah. Of course, the Munsters are all the classic monsters in the 60s. We've got, Universal Monster cereals. Look at Count Chocula, Frankenberry. Come on. Even Blueberry with Peter Lorre, right? And then we wouldn't have the Grinch if it wasn't for Boris Karloff's Frankenstein. There's so many things that these guys did that influence us even today, right? So as much as you go, man, these were cheesy. I can't watch these old classic horrors. I need to be scared. Some of these still deliver. And that's why Universal is king. So
I agree 10,000%.
Yeah. So
well, Mark, with that, I think Beau is desperately awaiting one of your famous goodbyes to wrap up May.
Well, I'm actually going to quote something I put in all of my books, and it comes from Frankenstein, the movie, where Carl Laemmle Jr. steps out onto the screen before the movie even starts. And he has just this little spiel. He goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see may thrill you. What you may see may shock you. It may even horrify you. So for those of you with a more delicate disposition, well, don't say we didn't warn you. And we will see you on the other side."